Well, it started off this morning pretty good with that breakfast. I think it was a good turnout.
Yeah.
And, I mean, who doesn't like pancakes? So, at any rate. All right. Well, thank you for coming on and taking the time out. I know that we tried to do this last weekend, but then unforeseen circumstances led us not to do this. But thankfully, we have today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. This should be fun.
I think it will be. And I've been looking forward to this, talking to you, because, I mean, there's just so much to dig into. You have so much to talk about.
Well, the Lord has certainly been good to me my entire life. I mean, and certainly in the military. I've done a lot of stuff in the military. Certainly not the most conventional career path.
Right.
But I wouldn't change any of it, even with some of the things that, like anything else, you got good and bad with everything. Mm-hmm. And I certainly ran into my share of frustrations in the military. But even with those frustrations, God has used every circumstance, both for my good and His glory, and it's been a fun ride. And after 28 years, it's time to hang it up and move on to the next chapter in life.
I hear you, man. I hear it. So before we really start digging in, go ahead and introduce who you are and where you're from.
My name is Tom Broadbent. I'm first and foremost sold out the whole route, born again Christian. I'm a husband, a father, and yes, even a grandfather. I'm more affectionately referred to as Papa with my grandkids. Yeah. But I'm also a soldier who's nearing retirement. Like I said, 28 years in the military. I'm a pastor. Love sharing truth with people, and so I really kind of seize every opportunity, whether it's in the military or in civilian life. I seize every opportunity to speak truth into people's lives, and in most cases, where people is kind of tried to shy away from sharing the gospel, even in the military, and with fears of, aren't you proselytizing, things like that. I've never shied away from sharing the truth with people. I've used it quite a bit on the job, in the office, out in the field, and it's always served me well, and it's always furthered my cause, whatever that cause may be at the time.
Right.
And so I've never shied away from it, and I think God has blessed me as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. So where were you born and raised at?
Originally, I was born in Torrance, California, which is on the southern coast of California.
Okay.
But if you could think for a moment of every bad neighborhood in California,
yeah,
I've lived there a time or two. We grew up poor, and subsequently we moved around a lot. Went to 4 different grade schools, 4 different high schools. Lived all over California, from Southern California to the Central California to the Northern California area. And then going from that to being in the military, where in 28 years I've lived over 30 places.
Yeah.
My entire life has been nomadic.
Yeah. And what's funny is you meet somebody, I don't know, just wherever you may be, and you're like, so where are you from? And they're like, oh, let's say you're in Arizona, and they're like, well, I'm from North Dakota. And you're like, well, what brings you here? Military? Like, nope. It's like, okay, why? I mean, growing up, the military life, you always know the military's moving. It's like, well, why did you move? And like you said, like you were saying, you moved all of those times throughout California, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of places in California, in the military.
Yeah.
All over the U.S., Hawaii, Germany, up in Alaska. Been everywhere.
Been everywhere.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, some quick questions before
Sure.
we start to dig in. All right, In-N-Out or Five Guys?
Hands down, In-N-Out.
In-N-Out. I love In-N-Out. Every time I'm out west, I always go get In-N-Out.
Listen, It's no secret. My family knows it. My friends know it. I am not prejudiced. I'm not racist. I love all food, and I tend to be a connoisseur of foods, and so whenever I travel, I tend to base my travel around certain food places. So when I go to Southern California, I'm going to go to In-N-Out. I'm going to go to a place called The Hat, which if you like pastrami, the best pastrami place, pastrami dip you'll ever get is at The Hat. They got some of the best food down there. If you leave The Hat hungry, it's your own fault because the portion sizes are just ginormous.
Ginormous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been down to into San Diego for a few weeks a couple of years ago. Never saw it, but definitely first stop was In-N-Out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though there was a huge
They got an In-N-Out right there outside of LAX. So you fly into LA, grab the rental car, and it's literally right down the street.
Yeah.
That's the first stop.
I love it.
For sure.
Okay. Favorite type of coffee? If you could choose. Black.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Black Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
I do like Dunkin' Donuts. That's a good coffee.
Yeah, it's good. A lot of my friends and family love Starbucks. Part of their process is they burn their beans. And so I'm not a fan of Starbucks. So I definitely go with Dunkin' Donuts. And whether it's at the store or in the house, it's always Dunkin' Donuts and it's always black.
Yeah, always got to be black.
Yeah.
Learned that years back. You didn't have a choice. It was got to be black or not.
Well, I started out as a kid, really, 8 years old, drinking coffee. You go to church, they got Sunday school, then they got this little 15-minute break between Sunday school and the family worship service, and that's when you drank your coffee and ate your donuts.
Yep.
And I saw all the adults drinking coffee. I wanted to be grown, and so I would have a small styrofoam cup with a little bit of coffee, about 10 creamers, and about 20 sugars.
Yeah.
And that's how it started out. And then back in the early 90s, I found myself at Fort Irwin, California, in the middle of January, freezing cold with nothing but black coffee to keep me warm.
Yeah.
And by the third cup, I'm like, this is not bad. And so, I've been drinking black coffee since. But interesting, I tell people quite a bit that drinking black coffee, reading the Bible is like drinking black coffee. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Well, when you first read the Bible, it's difficult to understand. It puts you to sleep. It's boring. It's all the stuff why people come up with excuses why they don't read the Bible. Well, it's like drinking black coffee. It starts out very bitter. Some people say it tastes like an ashtray, which I don't know how many people go around licking ashtrays, but they say it tastes like dirt. But you develop a love for black coffee over time and repetition. It's the same with reading the Bible. The more you read it, over time and repetition, you develop an acquired taste for it.
Right.
To the point where you get to the point where you can't put it down.
Right. I like that analogy. I've never heard that. I like it. And I'm going to remember that.
Yeah.
I'll pass that along for sure. Okay, last quick question before we dive into your life more deeply. All right. So it took a minute, but I thought about this one and I said, all right, Batman versus Dark Knight. And when I say this, I mean you have the Batman, the very first Batman that came out. So that was Michael Keaton, right?
Okay.
And then it went through, I think, Val Kilmer and I think one other person.
George
Clooney, right. And then after that, then the Dark Knight series came out with Christian Bale and Ben Affleck. So separating those two, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck series of Batman and everything before that, which one would you prefer? If you could sit down and watch.
Batman versus Black Knight. So I grew up watching Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Spider-Man when they were just cartoons. And so then you go to actually movies. I'm going to go with Batman.
The originals?
And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
There's nothing original in Hollywood any longer.
No, you're right.
They constantly remaking everything. Everything's a remake. And I'm like, how many times can you remake something, you know? I don't know, I'm old school.
Yeah.
You know, I like the originals, you know, and so I would have to go with Batman.
Okay. I agree. I mean, that's what I grew up watching, was Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
Gotta
love Jack Nicholson.
Oh man, he's amazing. He's funny. And he can play every role, and he I mean, just look at A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
You know, Colonel Nathan Jessup.
Yeah.
You know, he
You
played
can't
that.
handle the truth.
Yeah. I mean, he was awesome in that movie.
Yeah.
And then pretty much every role he plays, he's got that same thing. But I do agree. I would definitely go with the original Batman. I guess if you want to call him a series, over the Dark Knights.
Right.
I think they kind of ruined it with Ben Affleck, but that's my opinion. All right. Any rate, okay. So that's good. So we talked about you growing up all over, up and down California, and what were you doing? This is the high school time frame. So where were you living at around high school?
So
and working.
Again, 4 grade schools, 4 high schools.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to high school, we were living in Pomona, California, and I actually remember I went to Pomona High School. There was a time, and this is certainly not to make things about race or anything,
Right.
but when Pomona High first started, way back in the 50s and whatnot, predominantly white.
Yep.
There was a time that it became predominantly black.
Mm.
For literally about 3 months, it was predominantly Asian, and then it became predominantly Hispanic. And with the exception of it being predominantly white, I witnessed all the other transitions. And so I went to Pomona High School at a time where I was probably one of very few white guys in a predominantly black school, and which didn't bother me. I have, if you look at my family tree,
Mm-hmm.
literally every ethnicity that you can probably imagine is represented somewhere in my family tree.
Right.
From blacks, Hispanics, Native American, Irish, German, French, you name it, it's there. In fact, we joke that we're like Heinz 57. We're a little bit of everything, and so which I appreciate, having a diverse family like that, because I get along with everybody.
Yeah.
And, which was funny because at one point in my military career, somebody actually tried to accuse me of being racist until they got a look at my family portrait and they saw that, we're like the United Nations. We got everybody represented.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of close friends that are white, black, Hispanic, Indian, Asian, you name it, Muslim, Christians, Mormons, so race, religion, it's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. So what were you doing? Or what was your deciding factor to join the Army?
That was easy. I wanted to get out of my house.
You wanted to get out of the house.
So it started out at Pomona High,
Uh-huh.
9th grade.
Okay.
Then I was like, I need to get out of Pomona. So I moved in with my aunt and uncle in Taft,
Okay.
which is the outskirts of Bakersfield.
All right.
So I went to Taft High my sophomore year. Then after Taft, we came back to Pomona briefly before we moved to Northern California, where I went to Quincy High.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was at Pomona High, I cut school quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my 6th period class as a freshman was freshman algebra.
Yeah.
I went the first day and I went the last day. And evidently I wasn't the only one.
Right.
And so when the last day we all showed up, and it just so happened they had to take the final exam. And our teacher, Miss Espinoza, she was like, "You guys think you're slick? Tell you what, whatever you get on the final exam, that's your grade for the class," thinking that we would all fail.
Right.
Well, I aced the final exam, and so I got an A in that class. She held true to her word. But for most of my other classes, I failed most all my classes,
Right.
just because I didn't show up. It wasn't because I wasn't smart or I didn't do the work. I just didn't show up.
Right.
When I showed up, I did the work and did just fine, but I had missed so much credit. So when I went to Taft High and Quincy High, I was pulling straight A's. But when I got to Quincy High, the school counselor called me into the office and says, "Look, you're doing fine. You're doing fantastic, in fact. But from your freshman year, because you didn't show up and you failed out of many of your classes, you're really behind on school credit.
Right.
And so we want you to go to Sierra High." Well, Sierra High was a continuation school.
Okay.
And so a lot of folks that were failing ended up there. Young gals who were pregnant ended up there. You had a lot of gangbangers that would end up there, for disciplinary problems. And I'm like, I don't want to go to Sierra High.
Yeah.
I would rather repeat a grade to make up my credits.
Yeah.
And the counselor says, "Well, you don't have a choice. We're going to send you there anyway." And so they sent me there at the tail end of my junior year.
Okay.
And at that time, a good friend of mine, Sean Hartsfield, I overheard him talking to some other friends about joining the California Army National Guard. And I'm like, I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
No thought. I didn't care about the job. I didn't care about bonuses. I didn't care about nothing. Just sign me up.
Get you out of there.
And got me out of the house. We ended up, at that time, I joined to become a combat engineer. And which was interesting. You spend 6 days building bridges, and on the 7th day you blow them up.
That's fun. That's rewarding.
And so I went in on what's called a split option, where you go to basic training during this between your junior and senior year.
Okay.
Well, when I came back from my senior year, I just said, "You know what? I don't need this. I'm done." And so I chose to drop out of high school.
Okay.
And not having a high school education or a college degree, it became very difficult to find a job that would pay me enough to support myself, let alone a family.
Right.
And so I ended up becoming an entrepreneur of sorts.
Okay.
And I would start businesses. I did everything from selling Kirby vacuum cleaners back in the day to doing collections, to cleaning carpet, doing property maintenance type stuff. We had a business for a while where my grandfather, my uncle, and myself got together and started a business building FHA foundations for mobile homes. Got into the mortgage industry, did mortgages, sold real estate, things like that. In the California National Guard, they would not promote me to E5 unless I had a GED. So although I was technically supposed to graduate high school in 1990, I didn't get a GED until 1995.
Okay.
And so that way I'd get promoted. And so I did 8 years in the Guard, got out. I did, by this time I had a business in Southern California called Traveling Notary Network, where we had accounts with escrow companies. They would FedEx my office mortgage loan documents.
Right.
People either purchasing a home, refinancing, getting an equity line of credit. And then I would hire independent notaries. They would go out to the borrower's home or business, sign all the documents, notarize them, bring them back to the office. I'd FedEx them back to the escrow company, and they would pay us, $120. 70% went to the notary, 30% came to the office to cover our overhead, and that's what I did. And incidentally, that's how I met my wife.
Okay.
She came to work for me. She didn't ever listen to me, and so I thought I either got to marry her or fire her. So I married her, and she still don't listen to me. So I'm kidding, of course, but and so then I really had a desire to start my own mortgage company. And so at the end of 1999, we moved from California to Colorado, to the North Denver area in a small suburb called Thornton, Colorado.
Okay.
And at that time, I decided to go to work for Wells Fargo Bank home mortgage, just so I can learn all the players. And so the decision to come to Colorado was based on a desire to start my own mortgage company and looking at what state licensing requirements were.
Right.
So California's the worst. There's tons of both experience and education that they're looking for you to have before you become eligible to become a broker.
Right.
Washington State, Nevada, Colorado, at that time had no licensing requirements whatsoever. We knew no one in Nevada, so we didn't bother to go there. I had family in Washington State and here in Colorado, and after kind of praying about it, we decided to come to Colorado. So I got to know, went to work for Wells Fargo, got to know the different appraisers, escrow, title. Once I learned everybody in the industry, then I branched out on my own, started high trust funding.
Okay.
And that, like any new business, you kind of go up and down,
right,
until you get established. And it got to a point where we knew we needed to make some changes. And I had a business associate working with me at the time, and so we were right in the middle of trying to make some positive changes to grow the business when 9/11 hit.
Okay.
And so I sold my part of the business to my business associate and decided to come back in the military, active duty.
Right.
And at that time, because I had a 5-year break in service, I went from being a staff sergeant to coming back in as a E2, private, which was frustrating. And I had to do basic training all over again.
Oh, jeez.
So back to Fort Benning, Georgia, for basic training. And our first active duty assignment was Germany, Vilsig, Germany.
Okay.
And so when I came back in, I came in as an 11 Bravo.
Okay.
Wanted to go to the front lines, wanted to do my part, and we went to Vilsig, Germany, and in 2000, at the end of 2001, I think I got there. Now I take that back because 9/11 happened. Went to basic in October. I ended up getting hometown recruiting for the holidays.
Okay.
And so really January of 2002
right,
is when I went to Vilsig, Germany. And it wasn't until 2004 that I deployed for the first time.
Okay.
To Iraq.
Gotcha. So for people that don't know, what is an 11 Bravo?
11 Bravo infantryman. So in the California National Guard, I started out as a 12 Bravo combat engineer. After about 2 years of doing that, I reclassed, changed my job to 19 Delta Cav Scout.
Okay.
And so combat engineer, you're building roads, bridges, things like that. You're blowing them up. As a scout, you're the eyes and the ears of the Army.
Yeah.
And so you're, by doctrine, you're behind enemy lines, ahead of all the forces, and you're to observe and report back to the rear so that they know where the bad guys are at, and so they know how to position their forces and whatnot.
Right.
Well, when I came active duty, it was as an infantryman. Now that's your frontline combat soldier, taking a fight to the enemy type of thing.
Okay.
And so coming back in active duty, I went infantry.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward. Now remember, I came back in as a 30-year-old private.
Yeah.
Infantry, had a lot of sergeants that were a lot younger than me, and even though I had been a staff sergeant previously, these young E5s had no idea.
Right.
And so, of course, they want to play their little reindeer games, as a lot of folks do in the military, where you end up doing push-ups for no reasons or low crawling for no reason.
Right.
So real quickly, I had to figure out how to adjust to an entirely different culture.
How was that adjustment though? Coming in, so being in previously up to E5, getting out, coming back in, 30 years old, E2, and now you have. How old were you when you were in E5?
So, well, when I was in the National Guard, I joined at 17.
Okay.
8 years later, I'm out. So, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25.
Okay. So let's say
5-year break.
Right.
So now I come back in, I'm 30 years old when I come back in.
So how was that adjustment though? You being 30 and you probably got some 23 to 25-year-old E5.
So
how
basic training was probably the most interesting, and probably very telling of how things would go for me over the next couple of years. When I came back to Fort Benning as a 30-year-old private, there was 4 of us that were all prior service. A gentleman by the name of Taft came in as a specialist Taft. Me and the other 2 guys all came in as privates, even though we got out as NCOs. The decision was to put 1 prior service guy into each of the basic training platoons in our company.
Right.
I ended up in 2nd platoon, which was called the airborne platoon, because everybody in that platoon, with the exception of myself, had airborne in their contract.
Okay.
And so they put them all in the same platoon because that particular platoon was going to do a bunch of extra PT,
right,
physical training, more so than the other platoons. And so, as luck would have it, I got into that platoon. I ended up having to do a lot of extra PT. Lucky me.
Yeah.
But we had a drill sergeant. He was the junior drill. Each platoon had 2 drills, a senior drill and a junior drill. So this was an E5 at the time. Drill Sergeant Sweat was his name. This guy was dirty as the day is long.
Oh, really?
He would bring like prostitutes into the barracks.
No
he
way.
would put his hands on privates, abuse them, things like this.
Yeah.
And this one particular night, he had brought a prostitute into the barracks.
Right.
And for whatever reason, he came out of the drill sergeant's office stark naked.
Yeah.
Woke up the private that was closest to the drill sergeant's office. Let me get a pair of your underwear.
Yeah.
And of course the private responded, no, that didn't turn out so well. Some things were said, some things were done. The next day, we're all standing at the position of attention in the bay.
Right.
And drill sergeant and this other private was in the drill sergeant's office. And the next thing you know, you hear a lot of commotion, like there was maybe a fight that's happening. And next thing you know, door swings open, the private flies out of the room, and you see the drill sergeant's boot in his private's back.
Oh, man.
Where he was obviously abusing this guy, beating him up. Private took off down the room, tried to flee the situation. Drill sergeant come out, ordered everybody in the platoon to get him and to bring him back. I stood there shaking my head, thinking I don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And the next day, this private comes to me because he knew I was prior service, and because the drill sergeant made it a point to tell everybody I was prior service, even though I was hoping to fly under the radar.
Right.
And so he came to me for advice, and the only thing I said, look, if you're fearful for your life, utilize your chain of command.
Right.
Private interpreted that to go to the garrison sergeant major directly.
Open door policy.
Next thing you know, drill sergeant Sweat was furious with me because he thinks that I directed this private to the sergeant major, which I did not.
Right.
He threatened to kick me out of the military. One thing led to another. The C5 drill sergeant Sweat come under formal inquiry. He was then removed from drill sergeant status, and very bad things happened to him.
Yeah.
And so, but it was stuff like that,
right,
where I was targeted for being prior service, not necessarily given a fair shake, just because people, you'll learn that most people want to be the big fish in their little pond.
Right.
And he wanted to be the big fish in his little pond, and he thought I might somehow compromise that, even though I was trying to fly under the radar.
Yeah.
And so going to Vilsig, Germany, I ran into some of the same things where you have these young E5s that are trying to puff out their chest.
100%.
I'm the big fish in my little pond, and you're not going to do anything to, change it.
Yeah.
Type of thing, So,
but
it is what it is.
It takes a special person, though, I think, to, in your shoes, to be prior service, as old as you were, the rank that you were, to listen to.
It's certainly a humbling experience, to say the least.
It's got to be tough at some points where you got to bite your tongue, bite your lip, and be like, "Hey, Roger, sir."
At one point, we were getting ready to deploy to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
By this time, I made it back to E4, so I was a specialist, and I was a team leader for weapons squad. And just a few short weeks prior to deployment, we get a corporal that comes in to the unit, brand new to the unit. He had deployed previously. He showed up with the hard stripes. We're both E4s, but he's a corporal and I'm a specialist. And so because he's got the hard stripe, they give him the team leader slot that I was holding, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's the way the Army works. I get it. No big deal. I tried to share with him. I said, look, let me just tell you about some of our team members, some of the, things I've observed. He's like, I don't need to hear anything from you. Just trying to bow up a little bit,
Right, yeah.
And so at one time, he decided he wanted to play some reindeer games and make everybody do push-ups. And I got down, I started knocking out a few push-ups, and I thought about it, and I said, this is stupid. This is not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And so I got up, and he got mad. He started yelling, and I'm like, first off, yell all you want. I'm not doing it.
Right.
You put your hands on me, it'll be a bad day for you.
Right.
So if you got problems with me, you can go talk to First Sergeant.
Roger. Yeah.
He went to the squad leader. The squad leader went to the platoon sergeant. Eventually, we ended up in the First Sergeant's office, and I told the First Sergeant, I said, I came in here. I came in here to serve my country. I didn't come in here to play reindeer games. And I said, if you want me to play reindeer games, go ahead and fill out the paperwork, send me home. I'm done.
Right.
He asked me to step outside the office. I could hear through the door. First Sergeant kind of laid into the team leader, the squad leader, and subsequently the platoon sergeant. Said, look, you guys have no idea who this guy is.
Right.
He says, what you don't know about this guy, because you've never cared to even ask him, is that he used to be a staff sergeant.
Right.
The only reason he's an E4 now is because after a 5-year break in service, he had to come back in as an E2. He's never busted down for anything bad.
Right.
He just had a 5-year break in service. He's very knowledgeable. He can probably be a benefit to the platoon.
Right.
And as things would have it, they ended up switching me from one platoon into the headquarters platoon. And things changed a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
from that point, because I given more responsibilities for administrative type stuff,
Right.
which for me, I joined to be a combat soldier, and so going into a platoon to do admin type stuff wasn't my first choice. But as we deployed, we got down, like I said, it wasn't until 2004 that I finally deployed. Got through the first half of the deployment,
Mm-hmm.
and my reenlistment window opened up. And at that time, I decided that I would reenlist,
Right.
but I was going to go back to my old MOS as a 19 Delta.
19 Delta.
So mid-tour, I switched from being an infantry soldier to being a Cav Scout. So they moved me from Charlie Company to Headquarters Company, put me in a scout platoon.
Okay.
And surprisingly, ended up seeing a lot more action as a Cav Scout than I ever did as an infantry guy.
Right. And this is all in Iraq.
This is all in Iraq.
We're at in Iraq.
So we started out, when we first got there, a small little, it wasn't even a fob, it was a Camp Comanche is what it was called, no bigger than a football field. We were there for maybe a month and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and we came under attack from all sides,
Right.
and basically lost that piece of real estate, and was like 3-4 day battle that ensued.
Right.
And eventually we moved from Camp Comanche to Fob Normandy, which is not too far from the border, and it's probably, if I was to take a guess, an educated guess, it was probably about 80 or 90 miles, would have been east of Baghdad.
Okay.
And during that time, our mission really was to help guard Iraqi police stations. The problem with that was a lot of the times these Iraqi police stations would come under attack.
Mm-hmm.
We would fight the insurgents, and then many of the Iraqi police would then turn on us. And so then we'd begin fighting battle on two fronts.
Jeez.
So it was really frustrating and kind of crazy. Mid-tour, August of 2004, I took R&R,
Mm-hmm.
I re-enlisted, came back in as a Cav Scout, moved companies, put in a scout platoon.
Real quick, so you mentioned FOB. So for everybody listening, the Forward Operating Base, that's what FOB stands for.
Right.
And it's just explain what a FOB is.
So a forward operating base is just that. It's a location forward of where your headquarters elements are.
Okay.
And so for us at the time, I was with First ID. We was 3rd Brigade
Mm-hmm.
of First ID. Was based out of wow, drew a blank. Wow. I'm having a TBI moment here.
It happens.
Yeah. Anyway, they were based closer to Baghdad,
Okay.
the Green Zone,
Right.
and so that's where they were based out of. And so we're forward of that, closer to where the enemies are at. You know, is suspected to be closer to the border, and so the eastern border of Iraq. And so you know, you set up a perimeter, and then you live, eat, sleep, everything is within this FOB. And there's usually not a whole lot of amenities.
Right.
You know, in fact, for that first 6 months, while at FOB Normandy, we didn't have showers.
Right.
And so we had to rig up, you know, this 55-gallon drum, catch the rainwater, and have a hose, and that was, you know,
Really living off the grid.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And not only that, here's a sad thing. The unit we replaced did a lot of trying to get infrastructure in place,
Yes.
like internet and phones, and just some basic comforts of life that a lot of us here in the States take for granted.
Right.
When we came in before the unit left that we were replacing. The sergeant major ordered everybody in that unit, the unit that was leaving, not to give anything to our unit. And they went and they cut all the internet lines and the phone lines. And the sergeant major at that time, his response was, I want these guys to know what it feels like, what we had to go through, type of thing.
I don't get
it.
That.
It was just backwards thinking,
right?
You know, and thankfully we had a real good Sergeant Major Falkenberg, who we ended up losing that year in Iraq. Yeah. Stephen Falkenberg, his nickname was Dirty Steve, because he would low crawl through the mud up to guard towers, and Lord help you if he caught you sleeping on duty. He would crucify you, because he was that concerned about the safety of his men being forward of the headquarters element, you know.
Yeah. So funny story about that. We've always made jokes of when master sergeants go to Sergeant Major Academy, they pick out of a hat their pet peeve, right?
Right.
So, you know, you'll get some of the sergeant majors, you're just, you know, casually walking, and then you walk through the grass, and he'll come out of the office, you know, in a heartbeat, get off my grass.
Yeah.
You know, but that was what he picked out of Sergeant Major's Academy,
yeah.
was walking on the grass. So I wonder if that Sergeant Major actually pulled sleeping on duty.
Yeah. Well, you know what? He was hell on anybody caught sleeping on duty.
Yeah.
And
rightfully so. I
yeah.
mean, especially in that time, in that place.
Given that environment, more power to him.
Yeah.
You know, and I would back his play, you know, any day of the week, twice on Sunday, because when you start thinking about, you know, enemy breaching our perimeter because somebody's sleeping on duty, that's just bad juju all the way around.
All the way around.
Yeah.
And then, so good on him. I mean, he's just doing his job, and you know.
But I'm going to tell you something about Sergeant Major Falkenberg. He truly was a soldier's soldier.
Right.
Yes, that was his pet peeve. But I'm going to tell you something. You fast forward to November of 2004, the big push in Fallujah.
Mm-hmm.
When we got called up to go from Fob Normandy all the way to Camp Fallujah, which was technically a Marine outpost outside the city of Fallujah. We were called there to assist the Marines in taking back the city of Fallujah. And so during that operation, we're on Camp Fallujah in the motor pool, everybody doing all their checks, and inspections and whatnot to get ready for the ensuing battle that's going to take place. I remember very clearly, Sergeant Major Falkenberg climbed up on a Bradley, and he sat and he looked at all the forces preparing for battle. He was just sat there with pride. And I remember talking to him and asked the Sergeant Major, I see you're looking at the forces here. What if you don't mind me asking, what's going through your mind right now?
Yeah.
And he says, I was supposed to retire. And so this is my last hoorah, if you will. My last go around. And I couldn't have chosen a better team.
Right.
A better unit to deploy with. And as I'm looking at everybody preparing for battle, I know they're ready.
Right.
And he just sat there with pride. Well, we were in Fallujah for 3 weeks in November.
Right.
And we lost several men, Sergeant Major Falkenberg being one of them.
Oh, wow.
He had, the way the plan was, you have phase lines where you divide the city up into phase lines, and you kind of systematically go through the city, clearing houses, clearing buildings, taking back the real estate that was now lost.
Yeah.
And so the Marines lined up on the right. The first ID was on the left, and we're supposed to just move forward across the city, and we stopped at every phase line to, kind of reorganize or balance out our ammunitions and our water and our supplies and whatnot. And all the real estate that we took, the Iraqi National Guard was supposed to come in and hold that as we continue to push the next phase line. Well, the Iraqi National Guard got all turned around with their vehicles and just couldn't figure out how to unscramble, if you will.
Yeah.
And so Sergeant Major Falkenberg got out of his Humvee to direct traffic for the Iraqis, and ended up taking a bullet to the head.
Oh man, sniper or
Sniper.
Yeah. Jeez.
He lost, or he left a wife and I think 3 or 4 daughters behind.
That sucks. I mean, because like you said, right before that mission, he was like, "Hey, I was supposed to retire already."
Yeah.
But I'm here with you guys, so man.
But you know what? I'm gonna tell you something, and I think this needs to be said for anybody that's listening. I've had multiple deployments, and in 2004 was my first of several, and it was probably my worst.
Right.
First ID, when we deployed in 2004, I believe we lost a total of 22 guys.
Jeez. Yeah.
I struggled for many years, and you know this because of what you and I have gone through over the years with Reboot. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I struggled with that for many years. The deaths of some of the men that we lost in 2004. I struggled with Sergeant Major Falkenberg. I struggled with a good friend, Sergeant Madison, who also died in Fallujah. And I struggled with a lot of false guilt,
Right.
with some bitterness, with some unforgiveness, and I played the what if game a lot with myself. You know, the woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right.
As if I had any control over saving anybody's life.
Right.
And I've been a Christian now. I'm coming up April 2nd. I will be my spiritual birthday. I turned 33 years in the Lord, April 2nd.
Yeah.
And so certainly in 2004, I'd been a Christian at that point probably for, 10, 15 years by that point. And so I knew my Bible.
Right.
And I've read it from cover to cover many times. There's a verse in Hebrews chapter 9 that says, "It's appointed unto every man a time to die."
Right.
And then face judgment. It's appointed for every man a time. It's a date in the calendar.
Right.
I've read this passage so many times, and I never really applied the truth of that passage to everyday life. And so for many years I struggled with what could I have done differently that may have prevented certain people from passing
Right.
in combat. Well, when you understand the truth of that statement, it's appointed unto every man a time. You can't speed it up. You can't slow it down.
Right.
And you get people that will try and argue that point often. But the truth of that statement became very real to me in 2017.
Right.
In 2017, I was supposed to go to Hawaii for 2 reasons. My cousin was getting married, and I was supposed to be ordained as a Calvary Chapel pastor there at Calvary Chapel, Port Harbor on Oahu. 3 weeks prior to going to Hawaii for those 2 events, I get a call from one of my cousins that basically was telling me the one that was supposed to be getting married, my cousin Elvis, was riding his motorcycle, broadsided by a tourist, kind of a hit and run scenario, and he subsequently died. And so now I'm having to go to Hawaii May 2017, to be ordained as a pastor,
Right.
and to officiate my cousin's funeral.
Yeah.
And so obviously my emotions were all over the place. Struggling with the death of my cousin, which kind of triggered some other things with guys that I've lost in combat, family that I've lost over the years to cancer or to various reasons. And so I was just really having a hard time with my cousin's death.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I, we fly into Oahu. We settled in our hotel. We're now down at the beach, just sitting on the beach, sunset, and all I want to do is sit there and collect my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I got to figure out what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say. On one hand, I have a funeral I have to officiate, and on the other hand, I'm being ordained.
Right.
So I got, on one hand, something very exciting happening
Yeah.
in my life, and on the other hand, something very tragic.
Right.
And so how do I make sense of all of this? So I'm sitting there on the beach, and a homeless guy begins to approach us, and I can see he's carrying a box. The sunset is to his back, and so
Kind of
all I
silhouette.
really see is a silhouette of this guy.
Right.
And I leaned over to my wife and I says, I hope he doesn't come try and talk to us, because I really don't need this.
Yeah.
I just want to sit here and collect my thoughts. Sure enough, he made a beeline straight for us. And the closer he got, I found myself staring at this man.
Right.
Kind of like when you're driving down the freeway and you see a traffic accident, you can't help but to stare.
You try not to, but you wind up always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, even approaching the accidents, you get irritated at all the looky-loos.
But you're doing it.
And
too.
then you catch yourself doing the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Well, I'm staring at this man, and I know
Right.
that I'm being rude.
Right.
But I can't help myself. I'm staring at this guy's face intently, thinking, what in the world?
Right.
And I figured, you know what? I've already crossed the line. I might as well go all in.
Right.
And so as he got closer to me, within talking distance, I said, brother, I don't mean to offend you, but what happened to your face?
Mm-hmm.
This guy was missing his left jawbone. It was gone. His cheekbone was concaved in. It was like gone.
Wow.
He looked like he had a cleft lip. It was all scarred up.
Right.
The left nostril, outer portion of his nose, the nostril, was missing. So all you saw on the left side was the nose cavity.
Okay.
He was missing his left eye. It looked like it was soldered shut.
Mm-hmm.
So his whole face was just really jacked up.
Mangled up on the left.
Oh, it was horrible.
Yeah.
And he said, in a very hard to understand accent because of the cleft lip,
Right.
he said, 20 years ago, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I tried to commit suicide using a 12-gauge shotgun.
Wow.
Clearly, he didn't miss.
No.
And how could he miss when you got a shotgun and you're trying to aim at your head, your face?
Yeah.
It's point blank.
Right. You're gonna hit.
In that moment, the truth of Hebrews 9,
Mm-hmm.
it's appointed unto every man a time to die. He tried to speed it up. He tried to take his own life. He did not miss,
Right.
and yet he's still with us. And I said, brother, you have a testimony.
Right.
And he says, you're right, I do. He spent the next 45 minutes sharing his testimony and how God has used him over the last 20 years. And when he was all done talking, I looked at my wife and I said, that's exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah. Go ahead.
When you think about all the people that you lose in life,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a combat scenario, or even cancer, or anything else, and you think, why? Maybe I could have done something different, or maybe this could have happened, or that could have happened. that's not ours to own.
Right.
It really is not. When it's your time, there's nothing you can do about it. And when it's your time, it's your time. Equally important to note, if it's not your time, nothing's going to happen to you.
Right. Just like that guy on the beach.
Just like the guy on the beach. It was not his time. And the truth of that statement is powerful, because now you don't have to live in fear. You can live life with boldness. Not being foolish, but just being bold.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't go walk out in traffic just for the sake of walking out in traffic because, hey, if it's my time, it's my time. If it's not, it's not. You know, that's being foolish, you know. Yeah. Listen, I may not die. That guy didn't die, but now that guy's walking around with a jacked up face.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do things foolishly, but you can walk with boldness. You can go to combat with boldness. You can do all kinds of stuff in life with boldness,
right,
knowing that, listen, as long as I'm on the face of this planet, God's not done with me yet.
Right. Amen.
There's a purpose. There's a plan. There's intentionality, if you will,
yeah,
at how we live our lives and what we are to do with our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to a good point you spoke about. We spoke about together, but it's also in your book, which we'll talk about your book here in a little bit. But this was also another time in Iraq. When some stuff. Were you doing a different job at this point?
Yeah, so after 2004, we redeployed in March of 05. And I subsequently PCS to Fort Hood, Texas. Mm-hmm. And while at Fort Hood, Texas, I once again decided to change my job, change MOSs.
Right.
And I figured I did what I really wanted to do when I first joined. I went to combat,
right,
served my country in that manner. Mm-hmm. And so now my thought was, all right, what do I really want to get out of the military? How can I make the military really work for me? And so I changed my job. I went from being a Cav Scout mm-hmm. to being a CID Special Agent.
All right, what's CID?
So CID is criminal investigation. Do felony level investigations. We do personal protection for top 11 DOD officials like Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a lot of their foreign counterparts when they're visiting the U.S.
Okay.
So I did protection for Rumsfeld, for Gates, for Panetta, Shoemaker, General Shoemaker. I did General Casey, Admiral Mullen, the defense minister from Chile when he was visiting the U.S. So a lot of that kind of stuff.
Off topic real quick. When did you work for Gates? What year?
For Gates would have been in 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Okay.
No, I take that back. It would have been in 2000 from 2007 to 2008.
Okay, gotcha.
So remind me to come back to Gates.
Okay.
After we talk about some other things,
yeah,
because it's a very interesting story that most people don't know about Gates, but we'll come back to that.
Right.
So now I'm in CID. Mm-hmm. I get back to being an E5 promotable.
Okay.
So I almost made it back to E6.
Yeah.
E5 promotable, Cav Scout. I decided to switch over to CID. I have to give up the rocker, the promotable status, to even go into CID. So I give up the promotable status. I go to CID as an enlisted agent, E5. Within a year, I make it finally back to E6.
Yeah. And
then a few days after that, I go warrant, and I become a warrant officer in the United States Army. But in 2010, I deploy a second time, mm-hmm. Back to Iraq. Now, the first time in Iraq, we spent losing people, mm-hmm. killing people. It is all about death and destruction.
Right.
The second time in Iraq, it was a completely different story. the first time in Iraq, we were tasked to help guard the Iraqi police station. And as I told you, oftentimes those people we were guarding turned on us, and we ended up having to fight those guys. In 2010, now I'm a CID agent. At the time, I'm a W1, a Warrant Officer 1, getting ready to pin CW2. And so I am then I'm assigned to be a special agent in charge of a small post about 100 miles west of Baghdad, a place called Al-Assad Air Base. So now I'm the special agent in charge, which for a CID agent, being in charge, being a SAC of an office is something that many aspire to. And here I am, a young CW2. Well, maybe not so young, but I'm a CW2 either way.
Yeah.
And I'm the special agent in charge of an office out in Al-Assad Air Base. Small 3-man office. Me, an enlisted agent, and an interpreter. I'm not even in that position for 3 months. And I have some false allegations that are brought against me.
Right.
By not just one, but by a few different CID agents. One of which was the enlisted guy in my office.
Oh, wow.
And so, with any allegation, true or not, automatically are assigned to administrative duty, and you're pulled from whatever position you're in.
Right.
And so I was pulled from that position as SAC of the Al-Assad Air Base, pulled back to Baghdad. They assigned some other guy to take my place, and I basically was sidelined for about 3 months.
All right.
While they did a commander's inquiry,
right,
to see if there was any truth to these allegations. Eventually, I'm exonerated, and now my battalion commander and the operations officer, which was a CW5, now they got to decide what to do with me. I've been exonerated.
Right.
One of the guys made the false allegation is the guy out there in Al-Assad Air Base.
That worked for you.
That was working for me. Now, do they want to put me back with that guy or not? The guy that they called in to replace me is actually doing a fine job.
Yeah.
And so they don't want to kind of screw him over.
Right.
So they decided to leave him in place. And at that time, 3rd ID was deployed to Iraq at that time, and they were requesting somebody from CID to assist them with the whole rule of law mission. And what they wanted was for a CID agent to be assigned as a special agent in charge of a joint investigative task force. We called it JITF for short, right? You know the Army and the acronyms, right?
Military and acronyms, it's insane.
So now I'm the SAC of this program called JITF, Joint Investigative Task Force, where our responsibility is to come alongside the Iraqi police to teach them how to do felony investigations. So imagine for a moment, my first deployment was supposed to help guard the Iraqi police, and they turned on us.
Right.
And now you're asking me to go back to the Iraqi police to teach them how to do felony investigations. As you could probably imagine, I wasn't too comfortable with that.
No, I don't think I would be either.
So, but this is, in the military, you give an orders, you execute.
Right.
So, but now instead of having a 3-man office, they gave me one other special agent, enlisted guy. They gave me 6 interpreters.
Wow.
They gave me 6 law enforcement professionals. We call them LEPs for short, right? These are civilian cops that have 10 plus years of experience. They're coming over as contractors to help the military with whatever mission they got. And so they assigned me 6 of these guys. One guy was a former FBI agent, had 30 years in the FBI, had a guy that was part of ATF, DEA, sheriff's, local PD. I had the whole gamut. So I get these 6 law enforcement professionals, 1 enlisted CID agent, 6 interpreters, and a platoon of MPs to help transport us all over Baghdad or all over Iraq.
Military police.
Military police, yes. And so now I went from a 3-man office to an office of well over 30 guys.
Yeah.
And so at the time, our missions seemed somewhat insignificant to me, but they gave me complete latitude to build this program however I saw fit. And so for me, thinking from a strategic standpoint, I knew that if we were going to have anything that was going to be enduring over long term, long after I left, that if we're going to come alongside the Iraqis, it really had to be Iraqi driven, based on Iraqi law, so that things could get prosecuted in the Iraqi courts.
Yeah.
And so a lot of instead of going to the Iraqi police and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do, let me dictate to you what we're going to do, I went to the Iraqi leadership, the chief of police, the prosecutors, the judges, and I'm like, how can we help you? What is it that you need from us so that you can be successful? Mm. That was my mindset. That was my philosophy of how to conduct business with foreign government. It was played really well for these guys because so many leaders before me went in trying to dictate.
Right.
And they would spend year after year after year after year learning how to, form up information, how to take inventory of your stock, things like this, things of no real significance.
Right.
I mean, it's important, but once you learn it, you learn it. And why are we relearning it? It's like trying to go to basic training twice. Who would do that?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I think I did. Actually, truth be told, I went 3 times, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So really, it was an Iraqi-based program based off Iraqi law, and it worked real well. We got involved with taking them what's called we call it the Sexy Lab, mm-hmm. which is where we did a lot of the field forensics. Mm-hmm. And so teaching prosecutors and judges about forensics, they thought a lot of what we do in the United States as being voodoo or magic or something like this, like lifting fingerprints and using fingerprints to identify somebody. So you do little experiments where you put a glass in the room and you said, look, we're going to leave the room. You guys choose any one person to touch the glass. We'll come back and we'll lift the prints and we'll tell you who it was.
Right.
And so they really thought a lot of that was magic. And when we were able to show them on a big screen how fingerprints look differently and how there's different points on fingerprints, you can use that to positively identify somebody. Yeah. It went a long way with helping them with shaping their own laws, which was great. So now to the story I know that you've been itching to get to.
All right.
While in this position, there was a young man named Herbert. Mm-hmm. Herbert was from Uganda. He was a third country national hired on by AFIS to work in Iraq on a U.S. military installation. And AFIS, and just like a lot of other contractors, they would hire third country nationals because it was cost effective.
Right.
For your listeners, most Ugandans make between $6 to $7 a month.
Holy cow.
That's it.
Wow.
Being hired by AFIS to work in Iraq, AFIS were paying them $300 a month.
Wow.
So for Ugandans, this is like hitting the lottery.
Hitting the lottery for sure.
Yeah. And so, a lot of Ugandans, a lot of folks from the Philippines and from a lot of these third world countries coming to work in Iraq, Afghanistan, for the U.S. military through contractors like AFIS and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So here we got Herbert, a Ugandan gentleman, that he had found out that his sister, Rosette, had been kidnapped and sold into slavery there in Iraq. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, if you remember in 2010, Obama was president, and he very publicly announced that we were going to pull all our troops out of Iraq. Mm-hmm. When AFIS heard this, immediately they instituted a hiring freeze. So they have a young Ugandan fella in Uganda that was a recruiter for AFIS to recruit help to come to Iraq to work for AAFES on U.S. military installation.
Right.
When AAFES initiated the hiring freeze, that recruiter in Uganda essentially was out of work. He used his reputation as a recruiter for AAFES to continue to recruit women.
Okay.
And he was selling them $6,000 a head
Jeez.
to Iraqis. So they would tell these young women that they're going to work for AAFES on the U.S. installation in Iraq. Rosette had no reason to doubt that because her brother, Herbert, was doing just that.
Right.
She shows up to the airport at Baghdad International Airport. There's a guy, an Iraqi, holding a sign with Rosette's name on it.
Yeah.
She thinks this is normal protocol. He then takes her passport.
Right.
And tells her, I need your passport to in-process you. And then that individual then sells Rosette to an Iraqi doctor. And she's then forced into menial labor and into the sex trade.
Yeah.
What I didn't know at the time, that there were other girls that I didn't know about. One of these girls, Caroline, had stole a cell phone from this Iraqi doctor. Rosette used it to call her brother to tell him what was going on.
Yeah, what was happening.
Herbert went to the Iraqi police. They didn't care.
No.
Turns out, in the Middle East, Iraq included, it's perfectly legal to buy and sell people.
Really?
What's illegal is to restrict anybody's movement. So when you take somebody's passport and you don't give it back, you're restricting their movement.
Right.
But for the Iraqis, when they got assassinations, they got IEDs going off, they got people dying left and right, restricting somebody's movement is very much like jaywalking here in the United States or spitting on the street. Nobody cares.
Right.
Not when we got so many other crimes to be concerned about.
So here's a question. All right. You can buy and sell people.
Right.
But you can't restrict their movement.
Right.
How does that work?
It's all about the passport.
Well, I mean...
And so, again, when you start thinking about U.S. laws versus Iraqi law.
Right.
Well, where are we at? We're in Iraq. So you really got to look at Iraqi law.
Right.
Iraqi law, that's their law. And so you have to work in the confines of where you're at and what you got to work with.
Right.
I have the Iraqi law to work with. If I try to enforce or impose U.S. law, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so understanding the Iraqi law, that's what I had to work with. Well, Herbert went to the Iraqis. They wouldn't help him.
Get out of here.
He went to the Army. And the Army says, I'm sorry, you're a third country national. This is Iraqi sovereign soil.
So he was.
So it's third country national, Iraqi sovereign soil. The Army has no dog in that fight.
Right.
Well, somebody told Herbert about me, so he came to see me. He told me his plight, told me about his sister, and again, at this time, all we knew was about his sister. Right. I said, Herbert, absolutely, we'll help you. Mm-hmm. We'll help you. As we begin to dig in, I was able to go to the Iraqi police based on my position and direct them to work this case. And of course, their attitude was, why are we wasting our time working this case? It's restricting somebody's movement. Who cares? And I insisted. I said, look, this would be good training for your men. We're going to work this case.
Yeah.
So kind of forced the hand a little bit. As a result, we were able to tap into the NSA assets that were there in Iraq to track the cell phone that Rosette was using to contact her brother.
Right.
And then we were able to send a strike team in to try and rescue Rosette. Rosette called us the night we were supposed to go get her.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, look, they know you're coming. They're getting ready to move us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she used the word us, and I didn't even clue in at the time.
Right.
All I was thinking about was Rosette.
Right.
And so I told Rosette, I said, look, I don't want you to get hurt. But if you can stall as long as you can without putting yourself in harm's way, then I need you to try and get these people to I need you to delay these people, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, she interpreted that that she needs to try to escape. So as soon as they opened the door, she took off running down the streets of Baghdad, like at 2-3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And she ran 2 miles
Holy cow.
to an Iraqi federal police checkpoint,
Yeah.
and handed them the phone. And then they told us what was going on, and so we instructed them to bring her to us.
Right.
And then our intent was to take her to the military installation to have her medically checked out,
Yeah.
right? She said, no, we need to go back. My friends are there. And I'm thinking, well, what friends? Well, this is where Caroline and Catherine come into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back and we rescue Caroline and Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
We capture the Iraqi doctor and 2 other Iraqis that were involved and detained them.
Right.
And as we did the crime scene exam of the residence, we found over 6,000 passports.
Holy cow. 6,000.
6,000. Now, this is just one human trafficking ring.
Right.
6,000 passports. The average cost, $6,000 a head. 6,000 times 6,000, 3.6 million just for this one trafficking
Just
ring.
for that doctor, yeah.
6 of them were U.S. citizens.
Really?
Young females, contractors going over to Iraq,
Right.
that we had to take these 6 passports, turn them over to the State Department at the embassy there in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And to my knowledge, to this day, they're still MIA.
Right.
But I tell you, that was probably the highlight of my military career, was rescuing these 3 Ugandan women and seeing Rosette and her brother Herbert reunited.
Yeah.
What's more impressive is at one point, turns out Rosette and Herbert's older sister back in Uganda was dating the defense minister of Uganda. So we were able to reach back to him,
Mm-hmm.
and he was able to then to pick up the recruiter on the Uganda side. So we stopped this one particular ring
Right.
at both ends.
That's pretty awesome.
So here's the long and short of it. Here's the big takeaway. Again, this is the highlight of my career, right?
Right.
When I got to Iraq, all I wanted to be was a sack of an office.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a sack of a 3-man office. And God allowed these false allegations. If you remember in the Bible, Joseph, he had 12 brothers,
Mm-hmm.
or 11 other brothers. He was number 11 of 12.
Right.
There was only one other brother younger than him. He had, basically 10 older brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They beat him up. They threw him in a pit.
Yeah.
They sold him into slavery.
Yeah.
He was falsely accused of rape,
Mm-hmm.
thrown into prison and forgot about until he had an opportunity to interpret Pharaoh's dream.
Mm-hmm.
As
Got
a
it
result,
twice
yes.
because of the cupbearer and the baker.
Yeah. So as a result of interpreting Pharaoh's dream, Pharaoh named him number 2 in all the land. And he developed a plan to really save not just Egypt and not just Israel, but the Bible says people from all nations
Right.
came to Joseph to get food and so that they could be spared during this famine that was taking place on the land at the time. So what we see is Joseph having to endure a lot of small tragedies in his life so that he could be repositioned to be more effective for God's purpose, for his sovereign will. Well, when I first come under false accusations, one of the very first things I did was try to look at the Word of God and say, who in God's Word was I most like?
Right.
That was my coping mechanism, if you will. I figured if I could find somebody in the Bible that was going through what I'm going through, I could read about how he's dealing with life in his own tragedy, and maybe that give me insight in how I should deal with my tragedy, right, of being falsely accused.
Makes sense.
My immediate assumption was that I was like Job. You know, Job was righteous man. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet all this stuff was befalling him. Right. And his friends were falsely accusing him. Surely there must be sin in your life, right?
Yeah.
Well, 2020 hindsight, turns out I wasn't Job at all. I was very much like Joseph. Right. Joseph told his brother, when the brothers found out who Joseph was, they were fearful. Joseph's response is, what you intended for evil, God intended for good.
For good.
What these guys that made these false accusations against me, what they intended for evil, God intended for good. Right. God allowed me to go through one tragedy, the false allegation, being pulled out of that sack position, moved back to Baghdad, put into this other assignment. He allowed me to go through all that so I could be repositioned for his purpose, for his sovereign will. Yeah. And ultimately, Romans 8:28 tells me for my good. Right?
Right.
And surely this was for my good, because this became the highlight of my career. And so here I am. Now I'm being used by God to do what? To bring salvation to these 3 young women and to see them reunited with their family. I was awestruck.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow.
Do you think they still do anything like that over there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
here's the reality about human trafficking.
Yeah.
It happens in the Middle East.
Right.
Number one, it's legal. It happens in the Middle East. It happens here in the United States. The price per head in the Middle East and here in the States is the same. $6,000 a head. That's the going rate to buy somebody.
Right.
And we have human trafficking lines all across the U.S., from the eastern seaboard, going up through from Florida up through Atlanta into New York, going from San Diego up through Oregon and Washington, up through Texas, through the Midwest and whatnot. It's happening.
Right.
Everything from massage parlors to prostitution to the Merry Maids. Not that Merry Maids is a site, but people being forced to do maid service, things like this. And so the menial labor, the sex trafficking, it's happening. Yeah. It's happening. People are selling babies to people who can't adopt or can't foster or have kids of their own. They're being sold that way. There's so much going on with human trafficking. It's really shameful. And just working at one case really opened up my eyes. There's a group here in Colorado that I don't know if you're aware of. It's called I think it's called the Exodus Way or something like that. It's a local organization that does a lot of work. They coordinate with multiple jurisdictions, the local, state, federal level. In fact, you should try, if you continue with this podcast, reach out to those folks and interview them on your podcast, because the work that they do, they've been doing work now for, I think, 7 years now. Okay. And they've rescued over 1,000 individuals from human trafficking. They're doing great work. Yeah. And so they got a website. You can look at their website online. Fantastic organization, doing a lot of good work to rescue people who've been trapped in that lifestyle. Yeah. So
it's sad. It's sad hearing that. That it happens in this day and age. I mean, obviously, a lot of people know about it. It just sucks to hear about it.
Yeah, but I think the more we bring attention to it, through multiple venues, whether it's radio, podcast, TV, newspapers, word of mouth. The more people know about it, what we need to do is teach people what to look for, and teach people not to be afraid to question things that are may seem out of place. If you see something, say something type of mindset. Because you never know. You never know when you might encounter something like that, and simply saying something to somebody, even if you're wrong, it's better to say something and be wrong than to say nothing, and turns out something's going on. So.
All right, so we've pretty much discussed a lot of your career, a lot of ups and downs, and the reason I wanted to hear the story of Herbert and his sister, because you said with the guy in Hawaii, things happen for a reason.
Right.
And a door closes or it opens, and I know that you had that happen to you, and I was like, man, that's perfect, right? God closed the door on this way, He put you over here, and you did a good thing, and probably a lot of good things for all those people. So, and I think that's pretty neat. And throughout life, you have a lot of doors that close, and if you use that as like a negative, like, but you're being repurposed for something. You might not know what it is,
right?
But eventually, you may not. But God's working. He's making you work for something.
Working through it all.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. Well, that's really all I got for today.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do, though, is pick back up later on, and then we can catch back up. We'll continue on from post-military to today. One thing I want to hit on really quick before we get off, you mentioned Reboot.
Yes.
Can you quickly pitch that?
So, yes, a couple of things. When we come back, the next time I'm on this program, remind me to talk about Gates. Remind me to talk about the book.
Yes.
But first, let's talk about Reboot.
Okay.
Reboot Combat Recovery. It's a 12-week Bible-based program, or curriculum, if you will. It's not a support group. It's not a self-help group. It's a curriculum. It's a class that you actually take for veterans and their spouses suffering from the effects of combat trauma. Fantastic program. Started originally, I think, around the 2007-2008 time frame. Really didn't get the official launch until 2011. But it's such a fantastic program that at a time where the suicide rate among veterans are between 20 and 22 a day, class participants in the last 10 years, I think maybe 3 in all have taken had taken part in their own demise.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, 0 divorces.
That's good.
Which is amazing. But it's such an effective program. Again, it's all based on absolute truth, true statements that we get from God's Word. And so I've been teaching this course now for a couple of years. It started out at Fort Campbell with a young couple. He was a pastor, his wife was a psychologist, and they worked together to develop this program. And like I said, it's got its official kickoff in 2011 out of Fort Campbell, and now this course is being taught all over the globe, not just within the U.S., but down in Australia, over in Germany, Korea, Japan. Probably about a year ago, they made some inroads to Israel. It's literally being taught all, in different parts of Africa. It's being taught all over the place, and it's highly effective. It's great. We're going to do it here in Colorado Springs. We got 5 military installations here centrally located to the Springs, and there is another group that's doing it here in the Springs, but more the merrier. And so we're going to launch another one. Our next course that we're launching going to take off here right after Easter, here in April. It will go through June. 10 weeks of teaching.
Okay.
The 11th week is about testimonies about how this program has helped our veterans. And in week 12, we graduate folks just like you would any other course that you take. There's always a graduation where they're going to be able to graduate. And the biggest testimony or biggest testament to the effectiveness of this program is we have a very large, upwards of 46% of Reboot graduates that come back and either lead or take some part in leadership within future Reboot courses. That's how effective it is. Wow. It's a fantastic program.
Absolutely.
Anybody can check it out. They're on the internet at www.rebootrecovery.com. It's a fantastic program. They now have programs not just for veterans, but they also have programs for first responders. And now, just this last year, they developed curriculum for the average Joe, for any civilian that's going. Because what we're learning is that people go through all sorts of trauma, not just combat trauma, but it could be a divorce, it could be losing a job, losing a home, losing their dog. People process trauma differently, and it could be literally almost anything out there that could be very traumatic for an individual. If you're one of those type of people that you've experienced something in your life, traumatic, get plugged into Reboot. There's a class out there for you, and it's super helpful and effective. As a combat vet myself, I was never a student in the class. I've always taught it, but every time I teach this class, it's therapeutic for me, and it helps me out a great deal. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury, TBI, with anxiety disorders, and yet every time I teach this course, it's therapeutic for me. Great course.
So not only does it
Recovery.
helps the people, but helps you as well.
Absolutely. It's a win-win for everybody.
Awesome. All right. You want to give any shout-outs before we take off?
Well, listen, thank you for even doing this and for having me on here.
Absolutely.
Look forward to doing it with you again soon. Listen, again, Reboot Combat Recovery. I talked briefly about the next time we get together, we'll talk about my book, but if you're interested, Why Bad Things Happen, The Sovereignty of God. It's an easy read. It's less than 100 pages. It's on Amazon. If you can't afford the $10 cost on Amazon, reach out to me and I'll give it to you for free, like I do so many other people. It's a great book. It basically highlights 6 biblical reasons why bad things happen.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks, Tom, for being on here, man. It's been
My
a pleasure. I enjoy talking to you all the time. And until the next time.
Absolutely. Thanks a
right.
lot.
Yeah,
God bless.
God bless.